It all goes fine.
Not a problem, some peanut butter. Don't ask me to fix anything Macintosh.
Yeah, really.
You won't like the outcome.
A veritable MacGyver.
Ah, yes, and a split song.
Do you like that, MacGyver?
Yes, we don't want to go. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here again. Kathy Nichols is ill today, so she sends her best wishes and sick, not ill. Not ill. So Deb is playing Kathy's role. And she's very happy
To the
that.
best of my ability.
Very pleased it's not Halloween.
He would not be pretty roast tiara.
So we've got two sets of minutes in front of you, right?
Davis is smart out.
Let's go with the oldest first, so number 7. See if everybody's good. These are mailed out, so you probably all read them and know that you had no comments because you didn't say anything, right? So we all good with the minutes for November 7th? Yes, good. All right. How about for November 21st? We'll give you one more. We'll give you a little bit longer because you're trying to find it, I can tell. Very good.
There are 12 instances where proposed says based on feedback received. At what point in the process will we start filling in that content?
The last part I didn't hear what you said the file.
At what point will you start filling in that content?
Okay, Kathy?
The content actually is being filtered in, and you'll also see an attachment that has the schedule of receiving feedback for the service definitions. So once that goes in, then drafts will come back out.
So sometime in the late winter, early spring?
I'm hoping earlier winter than later.
Thank you.
That's very good. You paid attention. I like that. Hey, anybody have any trouble with these minutes? Good. We're moving on. One. All right. So we now have the major part of the agenda is the overview of the supports intensity scale and individual support planning. And I think Monica is going to do a little bit of a pre-intro, right? There you go.
Good afternoon, everybody. So the care coordination group has been working on a system policy for ISP planning. And I saw Rose at our meeting Friday ago, suggested that we do a little overview on the SIS and the ISP before we actually present the policy. The policy is from this package today. So Rose Burnett and Gina Manley from ECBH volunteered to put this presentation together. And we're thankful for that. And so without further ado, good afternoon. I know many of you, and some of you I don't know, but my name is Rose Burnett. I'm the IDD Clinical Director at ECBH, directing the IDD Care Coordination Department, which also includes our Supports Intensity Scale team. So the work that we've been doing on that work group has been, as Monica indicated, related to the SIS policy in terms of how information from an individual support plan is integrated into that. Excuse me, I said that backwards. So information gained from the SIS, how that's integrated into the actual individual support plan. So I'm thinking about this meeting today and trying to, I think the state and the other meetings, what we've tried to do is to sort of lay a foundation with information. So it seemed that maybe we'll do a little overview of the actual individual support plan or ISP process. We'll also do an overview of the supports intensity scale, and Regina is our assist manager at ECBH, and she'll do that. I'll also talk about the role of the care coordinator, and this is, of course, this is ECBH speaking, but the ISP process is There is a guidance document that all MCOs use, and the care coordination roles should be consistent based on our contract with the state. So while it is us speaking, the processes should be the same in terms of the elements of what we do. But anyway, so we'll do an overview of the ISP process, we'll do an overview of CIS and care coordination, and we'll also talk about the policy in terms of how teams should use the information they gain from the supports intensity scale as they are developing individual support plans. I'll never be able to stand there. See if I can keep up. Okay, we do that. So we do today, I would say we do need your feedback. I mean, we're open to feedback on anything, but the major intent is around the policy that we'll talk about towards the end. So in terms of individual support planning, again, that is specific to individuals who receive innovation waiver services. There is a guidance document that the MCOs use that is still draft, that's been draft for years, and it really, and you can go to the next slide, please. It provides really a framework or a foundation to ensure that we all kind of do it the same way as much as possible, find a way. These are sort of the elements of the document. So, you know, of course, person-centered thinking, and then the actual person-centered planning process, person-centered assessment, sort of the preparation that the team with the care coordinator is going to do to actually write and prepare for that ISP, having that meeting, actually documenting that ISP, through service authorization, getting that plan in the hands of everybody, and the delivery and monitoring of services. So that's the way that's sort of laid out. Next, yes, there you go. I hope y'all can, well, I guess you have hard copies. So, the ISP process, and everybody in this room probably knows this, and you're probably going to say, yeah, we've talked about this for years, but it really is very important that that be a person-centered process. And I'm sure that probably, well, I won't say I'm sure, we get feedback that sometimes that looks different from person to person. But the guiding principles, the intention is that it be a person-centered process in the development and implementation of that plan. It really should be led by that individual receiving services and or family or guardian, however that's decided upon based on that person and their guardian. It really is about trying to support that person to identify what their dreams are, what they want to get out of services, what they want their life to be like, and how they want to proceed with all that. That is the intention. It is intended to be a collaborative process between that individual, that guardian, team members, other people that support them.
I know.
The plan is really intended to be a guiding document for everybody, that's for the individual, of course, and people who are supporting them, to ensure that, you know, sometimes I think, and y'all may probably experience this, because it's a form, it's a piece of paper, or, you know, in reality it's multiple pieces of paper. Sometimes I think it's easy to get into the process of let's just fill out the form, right? We got to fill out the form because we got to get services. If we follow this process, and if we're real mindful, that won't happen. But I think at ECBH, we try to be cautious against that, and we try to talk with the care coordinators and providers about that on a regular basis, because that's a real easy sort of thing to get into. And then you can lose sight of the purpose of the plan is to ensure, again, that the individual and or guardian are able to tell us what they want, tell us what they need in terms of, maybe they need help figuring out what they want. A lot of people don't have a good sense of exactly what's out there or how they want to proceed. So that is the intent of the plan. So the actual person-centered planning process has some specific key values and principles. Some of this is repetitious, but we do think it's very important for the process. So again, it builds on that individual's strengths, their gifts, what their contributions are within their family, within their community. It should really help support that individual in terms of, again, what is it they want to do? How do they want to be supported? What do they want to do to contribute to society if indeed that's something they're interested in? It's about helping people learn how to make choices and provide enough information in the method by which that individual can understand in terms of informed choices. Again, that person-centered planning piece really kind of builds that foundation about what it is that individual wants or needs out of the system of services and supports, in addition to non-paid services and supports. The ISP should contain everything that that person needs, whether it's a paid support, something a family member, or somebody else in that person's life is going to do with them and for them. So, person-centered planning is also a way to try to, on a systems level, to really ensure that we use services in a way that's fair and equitable across the system. We know, number one, everything can't be purchased, and it's never a good thing to set anybody up by buying everything for them. We create a lot of dependency. We've done that in the system for many years. There's never enough money, and if we don't use our resources fairly, as you all know, we have a lot of people that still are waiting for services, whether it be innovations waiver services or state-funded services. The resources are very limited. So if we do person-centered planning correctly, and we don't teach dependence on paid services, we can more equitably support people in the system across the system. Creating community connections, we've talked about that. We've talked about that since, I sometimes tease that I've been in the system 100 years. I'm not really 100 years old. Sometimes I feel like it. But we've talked about community connections, social roles, natural supports for as long as I've been in the system. And we need to continue to do that and do that in more meaningful ways. We also have to be really sensitive to that individual's culture, their family, their lifestyle, what they value, not so much what we value. Again, as we supervise care coordinators, we all come into the system with experiences and values. But it is absolutely wrong for us, as an MCO care coordinator, to impose our values on an individual or a family. So we always have to be very sensitive to that, and that is one of the key elements. Again, respectfully working with individuals, guardians, and the team to try to come to the balance that's needed to create a meaningful plan for the person. Probably touched on some of this, but again, that person-centered planning is sort of that umbrella. That ISP document is sort of that umbrella that's going to cover all services and supports, whether there are services funded through the innovations waiver, whether there's something that a neighbor, a friend, a mom or dad are going to do with and for the individual, or somebody else in the community as appropriate, as that person wants. Again, it starts with really trying to determine what is it that person wants out of their life, wants out of services. I think sometimes we want to give people services, but we're not always really good at educating people about what is it you want before we start throwing services at them. And I think sometimes that's a process. You're not going to sit down with somebody new that you don't know very well and probably get that information all in one meeting. It really, person-centered planning and ISP development, excuse me, is really an ongoing, very fluid process, and we have to be very sensitive to that. Strengths and preferences, I think we've talked about that for many years as well, and I think we try to do that, although I'm not sure we do that very well, and we have to pay attention to that. So let me talk a little bit about peer coordination in terms really kind of specific to their role in the ISP and how they support and work with individuals. Their job is really to provide information and education to the individual, to their family, their guardian, people on the team, about the process, about whatever assessments might be needed, about what information is needed to be learned from the individual, and to provide lots of information about what services and supports are available. Sometimes people come into the system, or if it's an ongoing plan, they have assessments which are current, which are, helpful, and don't need assessments. We're not all about assessing everybody, but we also want to make sure that we have enough current information so that the person's needs are well identified, in addition to the assessments that sort of speak to what it is that person wants out of services. So sometimes a care coordinator, there are some assessments they are required to do. There's a risk assessment that we have to do every year, and other kinds of things like that that they do. Some of the more formalized assessments, like occupational therapy, psychological assessments, the actual, they refer people out for those assessments. The care, yes ma'am.
I don't know if it's appropriate to ask a question here though. In this situation, just because I had a situation arise yesterday, and I'm looking at the list of things because I was told by the care coordinator it really wasn't their role, and I'm just trying to wrap my mind around if, for example, somebody had wheelchair problems, they're told by the provider it's going to be 5 months before we can get brakes on your wheelchair. To me, safety issue, major.
Absolutely.
The family member who's the guardian is probably in their 80s, limited ability to do some things on her own or even know what's out there to what other providers to go to. Is it the responsibility of the care coordinators to help them know a list of other providers to call or help? I know they can't advocate that. So who is in the system right now there to help with advocating? Because what ended up happening by the end of the day, that wheelchair was falling apart. Half of it was gone on the back. True emergency here. I'm like, what are we going to do? And trying to get some help here. I was at a loss. So I just was wondering, in that situation, where do you reach out? What do you do?
In our world, the care coordinator should absolutely be assisting that family with that situation. They're going to have to broker some of that. They're going to have to find a vendor that can step in and do that. They're going to have to help with the payment of that, or at least secure that payment. It may not be Innovations waiver. It may be straight Medicaid DME paying for it.
But even if they're an Innovations care coordinator, they still can do all of that, right?
Absolutely. That is way more than advocacy. That is coordinating services. That is health and safety. And that is their job.
Where's the checks and balances when, as I sat through these meetings, we talked about a lot of things we're putting together. The system, if it's going to work, we all know that no system is perfect, and there are going to come moments when things don't work the way they're supposed to. And I guess my question always goes back to that: what are the checks and balances? What is the recourse when it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, so that instead of continuing down a path of not working, we can put things back on track where it's supposed to be and make sure that, okay, we had a care coordinator that maybe was misinformed or didn't get the message correctly. What's the alternatives that anybody that's utilizing the system have to be able to say, wait a second,
Well,
what next?
So the best thing that could have happened is that she should file a complaint with that NCO on that
Yep.
care coordinator. And so that shapes the way they're training their care coordination staff. They find out it is just one person, or is it some sort of total system, like they were all told no.
Right, because I do think it is a system that there's a paranoia from care coordinators when I talk to them. Well, we're not allowed to advocate. We're not, and seeing that in an advocacy role, and I think that could be miscommunication.
That's coordination of Medicaid services.
Well,
Filing a complaint really does get that way down the road in terms of shaping the way that people are trained.
Or the other possibility of which, if I raise my voice and say, wait a minute, I have a problem, am I now going to be forever in the dark hole with that particular care coordinator or with the system? That may not be the case. I've heard it from enough providers that is a concern. Whether it exists on the other end is not the issue. It's that it exists in the minds of the people that have the questions. Is now what do I do? Because if I say something, am I going to be having to fight the system even more because I raised my voice?
I mean, I can only speak to our experience, but and I interact with a lot of the other NCOs. I think we're all open to learning. I think at the end of the day, everybody wants to do what's best for people served.
Certainly.
I think it sounds like maybe that's, and I'm sure we make mistakes every day. I have no doubt about that. And we are constantly trying to educate care coordinators. But I mean, that's like Cindy said, that is a huge opportunity for education, not only for that care coordinator, but across that system. I mean, we have preached to our care coordinators from day one, having a complaint against you is not a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. You know, we all make mistakes and we all need feedback. Now, of course, if somebody does something that's pretty egregious, you know, something might happen around that, but that's all a different
Well, and
situation.
that, in the process of rethinking, no, go for it. You go. Just in the process of rethinking the waiver, there needs to be that outlet to be able to independently make a request or address an issue without the concern of having this come back upon me, and how we do that.
Well, I mean, people certainly don't have a problem filing complaints with DMA or the DMH, DSS. I mean, they do that all the time too, which is not directly with us, but at the end of the day, if we're gonna fix this fellow's wheelchair,
We still have
I don't know who the hell he is. I mean, you know, somebody's gotta say, it's him. You know?
What I was going to say is, and it piggybacks off of what John was saying, I don't generally like to be a cynic, but I am here for about 5 minutes.
A new side.
First of all,
Oh.
I feel like what we don't do advocacy
Oh.
is going to become a really prominent statement
Yep.
from care coordinators, even when it shouldn't. Now, I'm not saying there aren't care coordinators out there who don't do their jobs and do a really great job. I'm sure there are. That said, I've learned that it's basically true of any system in the industry, whatever you're talking about, where if somebody has a go-to where they don't have to deal with something difficult, then they're going to ride that thing until the wheels come off, unless they're an exceptional person. And there are exceptional people in the system, but not everybody's exceptional. So I think that is going to be a problem going forward. And I'm not just talking about this particular instance, but I think with this instance and others like it, it is going to be an issue going forward. And I think it really does need to be hammered home. You really need to be certain what a true advocacy function is and what it isn't, so that people don't hear that more often than they should. The other thing, though, that relates to what John was saying is we're seeing an inherent problem with everything being housed in the MCO, where people are afraid because they're afraid of repercussions, and the whole appeals process. You know, there's very little third party involved, which in some cases can be a good thing, but in a lot of cases it's a bad thing. And so we need to figure out how to foster a culture within our MCO system. This is what we're sticking with, and I believe we should. We need to foster a culture where we minimize the fear of clients and families as far as fearing repercussions just for expressing complaints, because ultimately the LMEMCO is not necessarily the ultimate authority, because there are appeals processes, but they're pretty close to the ultimate authority on a lot of things, unless you really want to go through a tough and long legal process. So I think we're seeing a couple of things that we can't get rid of them, but we need to be aware of them.
We can get rid of them.
The system as good as I think we can.
So another sitting about service definitions, it's really more addressed to the department people, Dave and Ned. So maybe one of the solutions to this is something like, these service definitions don't exist in our waiver today, but they are in other waivers like support brokerage, which could broker some of those kinds of issues for people who chose to purchase that out of their individual budget, right? Parent advocates who choose, when people choose to purchase that as part of their service array, or peer advocates even, there's lots of kinds of advocates when you think about when people need that role. Community Guide has a piece of that. I mean, we talk about Community Guides doing that with IEP and sort of the other systems. Maybe Community Guide's a thing that could do that that is in our current array. Oh, we don't really stipulate that as one that they would act in those kinds of functional capacities, and they could, but sort of delineate peer advocacy roles or parent advocacy roles within the Community Guide definition. So, I mean, that is one that's already in there. We haven't, maybe not going to rewrite that, I don't know, but it would be an interesting thing. It sort of gets at what John and Matt are saying around having that other third party, but people would have to choose. I mean, people who really feel like they need that would have to choose to use their resources to purchase it, versus just having it as a standing free thing that costs money that's not what pays for that, because what pays for that? I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what the philosophy is, what pays for that? It's got to be paid for by somebody.
Further to that point, I assume that we have very good practitioners, and I hear the accounts. There's some very good people out there doing that. The problem is if there is a single person that makes the mistake, inadvertently, doesn't matter, that drives the stake home that says the system is corrupt, and even if it was just an error in judgment, the system is corrupt, and that begins to perpetrate itself, and that doesn't do anybody any good. And my experience with building systems is build it for the least common denominator, build it for the worst potential, and then with all the good practitioners we have, they make the system really shine. But if you build it with that in mind, doing something what we just suggested, I think gives it that stability that says, okay, the system isn't corrupt, the system will have mistakes, and there is a means to address those mistakes that doesn't call the MCOs into question, it doesn't call the care coordinators into question, and it keeps everything kind of dialed in and on track. I think that gives everybody a lot of comfort, and will probably bring a lot of people to the table saying, hey, we like this. This gives us a lot of strength and makes a lot of people happy. That's my thought.
The other thing that we haven't talked about yet is that we don't really have a clear appeal process that's understood by families, by the end users of services. And until we have something that is clearly understood by individuals and by families, and it has some transparency, and it also has some efficacy, then I think that there is definitely a need for someone to be an advocate. But if anyone's doing their job in education and information, then that's, call it what you will, a variation on advocacy, because it is what someone needs in order to be successful. Taking into consideration certainly individuals who need additional support to do that. But I do think that one of the things we haven't addressed yet, and I hope we do get to that, is what is the appeal process and how effective is it, and what's the vibrance of it, because as we move to individual budgets, then that also puts the onus of responsibility on families that I think we really need to be very clear that part of our education and information is how to help families understand. I was at a meeting last night in an unrelated arena, and one of the things that the individual who's responsible for providing services said was, if I don't do my job, I want you to file a complaint, because that then makes my job easier to do. And I think that there are a lot of folks who've been around who understand and appreciate that an appeal process is that. But I think there are also a lot of folks who personalize that and don't understand it. So I just would like for us at some point, Dave and Madam Chair, if we could have some clear understanding of what that process is. And we need to discuss this week.
Have one of our AGs come in and do that'd be great.
With the rebuttal by disability rights? Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So on that last bullet road where the care coordinator submits the ISP, and it says review and approval, this is the current system you're reflecting right now.
Absolutely.
And that will change potentially, right, as we move into resource allocation.
I mean, this is just a current practice. They're guidelines, okay? It's not policy, it's not waiver, it's guidelines. So, I mean, this is what we've been operating off of for several years. The other important thing to remember, care coordinators, their job gets a little complicated sometimes, but in terms of that writing or that documenting of the ISP, they really are supposed to put in that plan what that individual or family guardian wants. Sometimes, and this relates back to the education around the services and the appropriateness of services and all those wonderful details in those services, but sometimes people want things that don't really fit in the service or may not be seen as appropriate by UEM, but the care coordinator really is supposed to provide that education, write that plan as that individual family wants, and then let it get through the process. And I'm not sure people always understand that, but it is important to know that. I think we can move on. So once that plan is complete, or it gets through UEM, it gets through the approval process, the care coordinator is responsible for making sure the individual family guardian has a copy of that plan and the providers. Different MCOs do the real authorizations differently. I'm not going to get into that. That's just a piece after the plan is actually approved. But everybody should have a copy of that plan in their hands. Care coordinators are responsible after that plan is up and running for monitoring. Some of that's face-to-face, some of that's on the phone, some of that's looking at documentation from the provider. The state has some very specific guidelines about the frequency based on specific criteria. But that really is an ongoing process as well. Some people monitoring, is not as, depending on where the person is, sort of how intense their needs are. It just looks different for different people, but it is a responsibility. Mary?
Can I ask a question about that? I was looking at the waiver document on the care coordinator responsibilities, and it seems to indicate that under that monitor service/supports, that you can write into the ISP what monitoring you want done. I know several families who have had issues with respite not being monitored because the care coordinators won't go out nights and weekends. So do they need to write that level of monitoring into their waiver, their ISP?
That may be a depth question, because that's more of a policy question, but I mean...
But if the care coordinators write, because they really don't say anything about monitoring the ISPs.
The expectation is that the monitoring is occurring for all of the services. So if someone is receiving respite, now if they've received it once this year, and it was missed, then I could see why that would not be monitored. But if you're receiving respite on a regular basis, I don't see why it wouldn't be monitored along with other services.
But that is something that can be written into the plan.
If that is something you want to get included with your plan.
Okay.
I don't see why there would be an issue.
No, I don't. And I mean, we don't work 8 to 5.
But you're not a care coordinator.
No, I mean the care coordinators, absolutely. Sometimes services are later in the day. I mean, we have to work around that, or they're in the evening.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we do much on the weekends, but in terms of going out and monitoring, unless there's a real something special going on. But anyway.
Right.
But it's also harder to monitor respite since it's a PRN. You need to know it was happening.
Okay. And then, of course, the care coordinator works with the individual family, the team, when revisions are needed or adjustments are needed to be made to the plan, because, again, it's a document. You would expect if people's needs change, as there's a realization that this goal is not working, let's figure out what that is and move on. That should be a pretty fluid process. So let's talk about assessment for a little bit. And when I talk about assessment, it's really kind of a broad topic. It's really about, again, trying to understand, having the information, not necessarily a formal psychological or a formal occupational therapy assessment, but assessments based on what does that person need out of their life, what do they want out of their life, what services do they need to sort of make that happen. The ISP is only going to be as good as all the information that goes into it from that person, that family, and the people that know and love and care for that person. So assessments on various levels are needed based on that individual. again, you don't want to get into the fact of requiring a ton of assessments just because you're requiring a ton of assessments. It should be based on that person's need and what makes sense to them.
And if I could, because I had to write down a few things when you were talking about this piece, and I'm so glad that you're talking about this. I think this is such a crucial piece that does not happen as well. I think, I don't know if anybody else, I can only speak for, I have a family member who lives with me. And also sitting in on ISPs through my, we sit in a room where we have an hour, and I'm in the field, but, to sit there for an hour and say, if somebody looked at me and told me, what's your hopes, dreams, and wants and desires, well, I need to think about that. But I have a different understanding. When you're looking at somebody with an intellectual disability, and you're saying, okay, so what is it that you want out of life? What are we doing to find that information? And I even asked that at my nephew's last meeting. I was like, what tools are out there so I can draw this information out from him? Because I really want to know, but I don't know. I can't say I truly know him. He lives with me. What all he really wants, because I think as he's growing and maturing, taking that time to really find that out. And it's not done in that our ISP. There's so many other things, but it's really, you talked about standard forms, and it's really dictated. That's what happens, is what I see. And, even the specific short-term, he says the long-term goals should be a part of that, and then the team should still be, the short terms aren't done by the team. It really goes back, we hear the information, and the QPs are writing that information, showing it to the family. But it's not as much of a combined process. And we talked about this earlier on, about maybe it needed to be more than just a one phase a piece, because and I even asked the care coordinator, do you have tools, do you know of some things? And they didn't know. It's just like, and I know to ask about those things. What about the family members who don't, who aren't exposed to that, who don't know the system like I do? What options are they having when they're coming in? They're just saying what they think they know, I think, and not even thinking about it much through the year, because nobody ever talks about it except for that one time a year.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
And there are tools. There's ELP, there's math, there's different things. Now, I would say that probably, I'm not sure how many care coordinators are trained in those tools, but there are people out there in the world that do that. And it sounds like somewhere we need to document that needs to be a part of it.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. Melissa's a really good point. First of all, I like the idea of ISIS, and I like the fact that everything that we're talking about really emphasizes that the service array and everything that we're talking about can evolve along with the person. I like all that. That's thumbs up on all that. The problem is that when you're talking about something like this, and this is going to be true of any evaluation you try, there's no evaluation that you use that's going to prevent these sort of feelings. An evaluation is necessary. But it comes to the territory of evaluation where, whether it's a guardian, whether it's the client, whether it's the care coordinator, they're going to feel like, all right, that's that for this year, unless they say something and we need to do another evaluation or we need to change something. And it's extremely difficult, because I don't even know how you would do it with people without disabilities, if you did have to plan this sort of thing for people without disabilities, because people make, some people make decisions about their lives totally randomly. On a random Wednesday, they might decide, I'm going to make some major decision about my life. And obviously there's extenuating circumstances with the whole disability thing to a degree, but it's kind of, I guess what I'm saying is we need to find a way for the system to be prepared for that, where a person with a disability or a guardian might decide on a random Wednesday, this is something that is way out of left field, but really something that I want to explore. And how is the system gonna facilitate that?
Yeah, and I get that, and that should, I say should, the operative word, that should happen today. I think there's a lot of reasons it doesn't. Some of it's resources, right?
Agreed.
Some of it's time, some of it's all those things, but I mean, that's kind of built into the process. It's in the words, right?
Oh,
It's
it
in the
is,
words.
it definitely is.
It's just the operational.
That's why I said, I like all this stuff on paper. It's all great on paper.
Right.
I'm talking about execution.
Right.
And even in the system, in the process where you have upper echelon and down the chain of command, those messages are transmitted, but it's like anything, once that message is transmitted, how it's interpreted at the point of contact, that's the critical thing. And we always focus on, because I've heard it and I've said it myself, we're saying the right things, we're telling our people this is how it's supposed to be, and at the same time, what we're saying and what they're hearing may be two different things. So that's where I think there has to be some kind of checks and balances in the system that allows for, if somebody does happen to go in a direction that is not completely consistent with what we want to have happen, that there is a means to be able to nudge it back where it wants to be before it becomes a dangerous.
So in terms of the planning process and everything we've been talking about, there really are sort of three components of assessment. Again, there's that person-centered planning piece, so what is it the person wants and how do we go about getting all of that. The risk support needs assessment, again, that's a waiver requirement. The care coordinator actually does that for the individual family guardian team to identify specific risks so that we ensure that we address those with the individual. And then, of course, gathering information around that level of care. The waiver requires that individuals have a level of care considered ICF-IID. So we're required annually to review that. Again, assessment is really a dynamic, fluid process. So some assessments are done on a certain schedule at a minimum, but there's nothing that prevents any care coordinator or other assessor from doing it on a more frequent basis if needed.
There is one thing actually that is not clear about. Say one aspect of a person's life changed, but everything else remained constant. Is there a possibility to change one aspect of an assessment without having to go through the entire thing over again? Or is it a situation where if a person requests a change or if a person requests a reassessment, they have to go through the entire thing over again, no matter what the reasoning behind the request?
I think it depends on the type of assessment you're talking about, right?
Oh.
The risk support needs assessment, that's the easy one to talk about probably, because that's about health and safety.
Right.
I mean, that could be, you could redo a piece of that. It wouldn't make, even annually, I think when care coordinators do it, they walk through it all, but there are certain things that may have changed, and that's what they identify.
Right.
So, I mean, it should be. Operationally, I realize it may not.
I know it's a different because I'm on innovation right now, so it's not exactly the same thing since I personally haven't converted it over to CIS yet. So that's being operationalized, but I do know the whole yearly checking of all.
That's right.
And at this point, it's just kind of checking boxes more than anything, only because they know that nothing about my circumstances have really changed. So it's more figuring out if anything has changed. So I guess that more or less answers my question. The thought behind the question was that I would hope that the system, in all the flexibility, also allows for flexibility in operationalizing it, in the sense that care coordinators are not necessarily hamstrung in having to completely redo an assessment or a plan. It's, a couple of things
The only caution I would say when you say the plan is, what we don't want to happen is a plan just to, every year just get transferred over and over, because that can
Right.
happen in the past.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
No,
It's just the reality of what you're saying, I think, is to make sure that we're not just filling out the form because somebody said we have to fill out.
And I think what I'm saying is there's a happy medium between making it so that it's easy to roll over parts of the plan that have not changed, are not going to change, and that you don't need to beat a dead horse,
Sure.
but also that you're making sure that everything that needs to be examined more closely is.
I think we kind of brought that up in previous conversations here, where there's a point of, you need to go back and rethink this just to make sure that nothing's changed. At the same time, if we're going back every single year and nothing has changed, are we really doing a service, or are we just going through the motions? There's got to, I think there's got to be a medium ground. What triggers a full assessment versus what maintains.
Things are going to be static. Once you graduate from high school, your high school history can't change.
Yeah.
But your college history is changing as you're going to college. Or if your wheelchair, you need leg rests, we're not going to take the whole thing apart and rebuild it from scratch.
Or I'm not gonna all of a sudden wake up tomorrow and not need, total assistant or virtual total assistance and transfer. Like, it's just not gonna happen.
But you may wake up tomorrow and want to go skydiving.
Exactly.
In which case
Well,
you need to make sure that
probably not, but I'll go with the hypothetical.
But you may decide that you want to pursue something else.
Correct.
And you want to, for some people, it may be, I don't want to go to the day program, I want to get a job, I want to go to college, and we need to be responsive to that. But we're not going to make you start all over with the beginning of the plan,
Right.
so.
Exactly.
That's the whole concept of the plan, is that it should be a roadmap that assumes that unless something changes, this is kind of the direction we're going to go. And like with any roadmap, if I'm traveling down the road, as happened recently, Google Maps sent me down a path that turns out wasn't available to me. Go figure, there was a roadblock, and I had to go 2 or 3 miles out of my way to get around it, which means that the plan just changed. So there has to be some mechanism in place that allows for the change and the flexibility without dropping the whole plan off and saying, start over again.
The plan changed, but you didn't need to drive all the way back to your house.
And I think there's been some of that in the system in the last, 10 years or so, primarily because we were also doing managed care and not support in the management structure of person-centered planning, which they're an anathema to each other. You can't not have assessments when you're asking people to make managed care decisions in a medical necessity framework. That's what the drivers have been in the wrong direction to achieve person-centered anything. I think going to resource allocation shifts that paradigm to the point that you can achieve all those things we've talked about, but didn't structure the framework of the system to allow.
Well said.
Okay, I think you can. And then, of course, I think I expected this a little bit. There are other assessment tools that might be helpful to the individual determining things like adaptive behavior scale and the psychological testing. And typically, those tests can help us in planning and determining what that person's specific needs are, what their learning styles are, how to best support them. But it also supports the level of care process that's required. The risk support needs assessment, again, that's annually required. It is basically to identify any health safety issues that the person may have in a wealth of areas, to identify, to ensure that those kinds of things, that the support is built into the plan to address whatever those needs are that are identified. And if, again, just like what we've been saying, when that changes throughout the year, because sometimes it does for people, it should be updated, the plan should be updated. The supports intensity scale, which Regina's going to talk about in more detail, it is another piece of very valuable information. It provides a wealth of information that should be incorporated into the plan, which is really where we're going with the policy. It is a nationally recognized assessment tool that really looks at the support needs of an individual It is not a deficit-based tool. It doesn't go in and talk about all the things you can't do. It talks about what kind of support, what's the frequency of support, all of those kinds of things that Regina's going to get into the details on in terms of providing support. And of course, all of that needs to be embedded in the plan, however it makes sense to that person. I think this is pretty fun.
All right, well, we're going to jump right into what is, I think, being considered now a draft policy, the supports intended city scale policy for ISP planning. When we were developing this process, or this policy, I should say, we had a couple goals in mind. To establish a framework for incorporating the SIS into the ISD planning process, and also to establish some consistency so that for administrative processes, so that your experience would be the same whether you're getting services on the western part of North Carolina or the central. So for consistency purposes. The SIS policy for ISD planning, there is broken up into 3 sections. There is the overview of the SIS, which I'm going to talk about. The SIS assessment in North Carolina, which is going to include some specifics in terms of how the tool is utilized.
Yeah.
And using the SIS for planning, which kind of tags on some of what Rose has already talked about.
Wonder what the fourth one was.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the SIS assessment. Has anyone ever already participated in the SIS?
No.
Okay. So we have some folks who have participated in the SIS. It's generally a 2.5 hour time together with a friendly SIS evaluation.
That's a requirement. They have to be very
And we really, as Rose mentioned, it's not deficit-based. We really are looking at what type of supports the person needs to be successful in lots of different areas in their life. Socially, if they're employment-wise, things that in their communities to be successful there, as well as things around them. That's just kind of one.
I have a few questions that may come up along the way, but also I happen to have to train in the use of the system. There's a few things in conducting it that I thought the group might want to hear from, and I won't belabor it because I know we're on schedule, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. It is a strengths-based tool. It's meant to focus on success, and that's success in the home and community, right? So it's the bar, and that's why I consider strengths-based. Were you going to go into that probably more, so I may have jumped ahead of you. But what I do want to say is, from having done a few of these now, it doesn't always feel that way to the family member. In fact, if a person has more significant support needs, and I think it's what we need to think about in the policy, but it may feel like it's really an exercise in what I can't do, or what somebody else can do, or what I won't be able to do. That's not what it's designed for, and it does do a really good job of helping us much in a more robust way understand the kind of support someone needs to be successful and will need in their life. But that process itself can be really hard for people.
Sounds like instead of setting it up as a framework, it's setting itself up as boundaries and encapsulating that says that beyond this line you can't go, which a framework, like a skeleton, you build a frame and then everything goes on either around it, but it dictates what it's going to look like when it's done for the most part, and there's some adjustments here and there. You create a boundary, and it's kind of what sounds like it's happening. With boundary, that means nothing is going outside these lines. You stay inside the lines, and if it doesn't fit, we're just not going to do it. And that may be the assumption, but that's
Maybe. I think it's more about how it might feel during that process.
Right.
And part of it is because you're not focused on, and what it isn't designed to do is understand, well, what outcomes do you want to achieve in your life? That's not the process that this tool is meant to do. So I would just say, as you think about the policy, how do you make sure people are better. Now, some of this will happen over time because the assessment will start to occur and will be every couple of years. But how do we really help people understand that a little more and be better prepared on the front end for this can get kind of intense. And there are parts of it, but this is why we're doing it, maybe continuing to think about how to make sure that message is, that if folks are going to go through this process, they understand that more, and maybe, again, maybe a little bit more around what it's intended to do.
Right. And Chris also is in a former life, was a CIS interviewer as well. So he has a lot of experience sitting with folks and facilitating that conversation. I think one of the important things that we really work hard at is, as we set the scene for the CIS, as we're sitting with families and kind of saying, okay, this is what it is, this is what it isn't. We really focus on what the CIS is attempting to do, what it's looking at is what support the person needs to be successful in this. So that's the bar. We're not looking at what skills the person needs. So the support in that person's life will get them to the outcome, if you will. So I think in that way, it removes some of the removes barriers in terms of kind of being able to not say, in some respects, this person would never be able to work or do certain things. I don't know if that kind of gets.
So let me just, I mean, I had assist by an AAID assist person.
Yeah.
For my oldest son, who has, every need he has is total assistance, right? And that was the end response to every question that was asked pretty much is he would need total support to achieve that. But the evaluator that came to do that, I think it comes down to, just like it would be in any assessment of any kind, whether it's for brakes on a wheelchair or foot rest or whatever it is, it comes down to the evaluator's skill set and how they make you feel in that moment. I didn't leave that assessment with my oldest son feeling like, God, he'll never accomplish anything. I left it really feeling like finally somebody's asked the questions that get to the what amount of support he needs to achieve his life goals, to the best of our ability to understand them given the communication barriers we have, because he's nonverbal. You know, so we don't really know, because he can't say, in words anyway, what it is he wants to achieve in life. We're pretty sure he wants to stay at home, and we're pretty sure that all the people that do all their little things in this system need to understand that so he gets adequate funding to do it and support, right? And so we really felt positive about the CIS, but honestly, if it came back, we had a sorry evaluator that didn't know how to communicate, that would not have been our experience, potentially. We might have left that evaluation feeling like, oh, damn, Cameron can't do a thing. You know, but it really wasn't that. And I think ECBH has done at least a good job of kind of staying focused on that. And I think that's part of the policy is really around evaluating evaluators' ability to make those connections so that families and individuals don't walk away from that feeling like, I'm never going to accomplish anything.
That's it.
Because not everyone can do evaluation like that. Just because they have a degree or whatever does not make them that kind of person.
So I think that's the right place to do that effort, is in that and monitoring that.
And you do that through that ongoing supervision, not just you achieve a credential and you're it and you've got it and you're good to go. You have to have reflective supervision. It needs to be an ongoing component of it. And when one goes bad and somebody files a complaint, there should be reflective supervision about that with that evaluator, right? Not just that they made it through all these classes that we set up, because that's what happens in our system. You make it to QP and you're it for your life. And you never have to get evaluated again to see if you're any good at it.
And maybe even satisfaction surveys to the people. That might.
At the evaluator level.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. So you had this, you ran a sampling over, every time we do them, find out what people are feeling about it.
An observation I had based on our experience as a citizen, it might have been the evaluator, was that it was developed maybe for a broader audience than just people with developmental disabilities, because our evaluator came up with more mental health examples of what the definitions and the questions we were trying to get to. So I think it might be helpful to know exactly how was it developed, and was it developed only for developmental disability? And I got stuck with an evaluator that was a mental health specialist, or is it also used? Well, it's used nationwide. You know, is it used for the mental health population as well?
Nope.
And if not, set us up for that so we know in advance.
How long ago,
We were part of the random initial set.
like 3 years ago?
When did you first do it?
Okay.
We were probably the first assistant, I don't know. From Canada, she was from
Yes,
Canada.
we got, I've seen some of those.
She was not a role model for
No. They're very defensive, they're very questioning every single answer that we gave.
And it also wasn't clear whether,
God, it was bad.
whether they were, she was trained on mainly children versus adults. You had an adult.
Right.
Anyway, there was, I attributed it in part to the SIS itself, but maybe it was the evaluator, but.
Yeah, and we work hard, you know, at CBH to have that ongoing professional growth, the training. And we actually have some peer interviews where we'll have 2 evaluators, just because that learning is continual. We have check-ins where we have a reevaluation of the evaluators, if you will.
So this was developed for the intellectual
Yes.
disability population, not
Yes.
the mental health aspect?
Yes.
Yeah, there are some questions in there that are related to mental health.
There were a few,
There are some questions, but.
Because you can deal with that as a person with intellectual disability.
Oh, absolutely.
This was broader than that.
Wow.
I think we got the same one.
We probably did. She was quite rude in our youth.
Okay, anybody else want to share anything about their experience with the SIS?
It was interesting because, again, at the severe profound end of the range, and we get to the discussion about jobs and employment, and being the smart aleck that I am, and there were a number of us, people on Katie's side. So when she starts asking about jobs and the sort of support that Katie would need to hold a job, and I said, well, now wait a minute, we need to first of all decide what job it is that Katie's going to hold. So Paula over there thinks that Katie is a nurse. She would be an RN.
Yeah.
And then I think I would have raised a daughter who wanted to be a welder. But now Catherine, the Q, she thinks Katie would be the pop singer Adele.
Yeah.
Those are very 3 different supervision levels. So which job is it that we're supposed to answer this SIS about?
I think that's one of the skills that's very important for the facilitator to have, to kind of bring people together in terms of, okay, what job is it? So that the conversation is keyed in on the supports for that job, right? Otherwise, you know, it's going to be all over the board.
Goes back to that evaluator skill set.
Absolutely. And as far as, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as far as for the whole conversation, that's a key part of the competency that SIS evaluator holds, is being able to make sure that folks are on the same page with regard to the intent of the question. And folks obviously are the experts in terms of what the support needs are going to be, and we have a major role in making sure we set the picture and that folks are real clear on what that picture is, and facilitate the conversation if there's differences in thinking around like what the support need really is.
Yeah, keep in mind, 19 were only for a training. So I did actually go through some of the actual SIS, but it was to train evaluators. So, you know, they weren't fully versed in how to do that. This is more of a client perception issue rather than an issue with the actual system itself. But when I was going through this that I went through, there were a lot of times that I had trouble answering questions, especially when you were talking about the frequency of the support needed. The reason why I had trouble answering those questions is a lot the things that we were talking about are not things that I do on a regular basis. So it's like, well, if I was doing this, then, and I mean, this, I guess, is also true for how much school is needed, where it's like, well, I don't usually do this, but if I was, this would be the answer. And I bring that up to say, I think it really needs to be driven home for anyone, whether it be the client, the guardian, both, whoever, that the SIS by itself does not shape the amount of services that a person gets or doesn't get. Because I tended to lean more on conservative estimates on what I needed, because at the time I was trying to avoid what I perceived as a situation where I would be seen as needing more support than I actually needed, and being boxed into a situation that would not be appropriate. Conversely, I have heard stories from families where they were as liberal as possible with the amount that they said was needed, because they feared that if they weren't, they wouldn't get the amount of services that they need. I understand that the system itself does not inform how much or what type of support gets received, but I think that really needs to be driven home, and I think it's going to take quite some time before that's really ingrained in the culture of the assessment, because I think that it's a natural human reaction to think, okay, this assessment is going to determine what I get or don't get.
Absolutely, that's an excellent point. That's some of the ongoing training that we as SIS interviewers, evaluators, do with our care coordinators. There is not a correlation between what your support type or support needs are, and that does not equate into your service type or the number of hours of services that that would make sense for you.
Right.
But are they looking at that for the future? I mean, there has to be some basis. I mean, I think we've even talked about in here that being something that is one of the things that identifies your budget, for example.
That gets into resource allocation, but I guess what I'm saying is, if you can think of, just for example, socializing. If I need the type of support I need with regard to interacting with folks in my neighborhood, and you look at how often I'm out, so how often I would need that support, and then on a typical day, how many hours that would be, you can't take what that score is and say, okay, let's match it up with a service, and say, this number of hours equals this number of hours of service. That's all we're basically talking about right now. Then the resource allocation piece, I'll let somebody else speak to that, question on that, but,
That seems to be at odds with each other, because obviously if there's an interview and it seems like there's not so much support needed, then obviously there would be less hours.
well, it will, because of, I'll dive in, I'll step in just a little bit in resource allocation. It will be reflected. There will be this wonderful algorithm, and all that will be factored in. I can't tell you what the algorithm is, but it will be factored in terms of the support type, the support needs, I should say, where the person's support needs are, will be factored into how you get to that formula of the resource allocation, i.e. the budget.
So in reality, this one person who's doing the SIS questionnaire, and you sit down there and answer the question, they essentially, in the end, whether you say it or not, or it's circuitous via an algorithm, their determination is going to result in diminished or increased amount of services. Because if they deem you your child not needing very much, then once they plug it through the algorithm, they end up with less. So it's very subjective in a way, and it all kind of hinges on whether we were fortunate to have a very capable SIS evaluator. But if that's not the case, then an appeal procedure would be
what Regina is talking about is the score itself. We're not going to be looking at saying, if you score within X and Y on the CIS in communication, then that equals 5 hours of community networking per week. But when you're looking at the CIS score, and you're looking at the whole score, you're looking at that interviewer has done it with you, and if I understand correctly, there has to be agreement at that table. The interviewer doesn't just make a judgment call as to what that score is. We're looking at a range of scores mapped out across the state. These are people who have scores similar to yours. This is the historical spending. This group here is going to be looking at what budget ranges are necessary to purchase which arrays of potential services. So there is a lot more that goes into it. It's your age, it's where you're living. Are you living at home? Are you living in residential? But it's not going to be, if you have a 76, then this equates with $3,900 per month, and you're only allowed to utilize it on X and Y. It's going to be, if your CIS is between 80 and 90, then, and you're living at home, then it equates to $40,000 or $50,000 per year that you can utilize to spend on services as you wish. So there's a lot more to it. There shouldn't be a need to try and game it. And the tool itself has been normed. So it's not.
And I think we want to be real clear and absolutely the CIS will play a significant role in how individual budgets are determined. No question about that. There are other factors that would be a part of that. And what I think I hear, we've heard across the state, is that there has to be a robust ability for people to have reconsideration if they don't feel that that process resulted in a fair and equitable budget. Now, ultimately, we're going to have to decide on how do we come up with fair and equitable budgets that are within the available resources that the state has to provide for these services. That's all part of this process. But the reason why it's so important you guys to be at the table is to help us hear the things that would be concerning to you about this process. How do we try to mitigate the things that are concerned as we're going forward, and people feel comfortable. And again, it's like anything else. If you go into a process and believing that this is what should happen, and at the end of the process it doesn't, we'll probably have a disagreement, and we'll have to figure out how to work that out. And it may never result to where one person feels they got exactly what they thought they should. But we want to create a process where at the very end, at least you feel it is consistent and the same for people across the state, and that is based upon something that you know is not so subjective. That said, we're talking about people. It is subjective to some level. This is the least subjective tool, I think, that we've seen in the ability to assess needs, and that's the place where we're at right now.
Well, are the people, like at the end of the CIS, when the person's like packing up, is there like a procedure for them to sign it, like an IEP, and say, and be advised of like an appeal procedure or grievance or anything like that, or if they are in agreement with how things proceeded, anything like that?
Well, can I talk a little bit about kind of what we do, and I think other NCOs also follow similar practice. Again, as we're sitting with people and facilitating a conversation around the CIS, we don't score anything without folks saying that's what it is. And there has to be an agreement between all the respondents that are participating. So that's one thing. We're very clear with folks. You want to see what I'm writing, or just making it very transparent. So that's an important part of kind of making sure during that conversation that people know that it's not me sitting over here and making a decision again and discarding what the folks are telling me the support needs really are.
Yeah, the evaluator really doesn't do that. I mean, they really pretty much guide you into a consensus decision making.
Absolutely.
So however many people you choose to have at your SIS thing, you know. And it's really more of a, what do you all think? What do you all think? I mean, they keep driving you at that to come together on your decision if you're not on the same page. But they don't have a dog in the fight of what you scored.
No.
Because they're not making a decision about, they don't even know the person. I mean, that's not their role.
Right, we don't do a file review, we don't do anything, we don't, we don't look and, we don't ask what a person's diagnosis is. We are there to facilitate the conversation with regard to what support needs are over all those activities. We do have responsibility for making sure that we are sharing what the intent of the question is clearly, so that, again, people are sure about what we're asking them to comment on and describe with regard to the type of support, the frequency of that support, and how often that support will be needed in a 20-time period. We do offer follow-up to families. At the end of the SIS assessment, we will ask people, would you like for us to come back once the SIS report is completed, and we will review it with people. So, and then we do use a document that basically identifies, all the pieces that, because we mail it out ahead of time. We have a document that identifies all the information that they received in the mail, and does talk about the appeal process. And people do sign that as part of that review.
Is that available through all MCOs or just yours in particular? Y'all have adopted that policy?
There are other NCOs that are using a similar process.
And to clarify, I believe it's a grievance process, not an appeal process. And then I'm going to throw out, once we wrap up this thread of the conversation, if it's okay if we take a break. I've got people asking for breaks.
Kind of going back to the process that we're talking about, even if at the end of the interview, kind of like the lemon law for vehicles, that we give them something. If anybody sits in front of me and says, and if you have any problems with it, go ahead and tell me right now. The likelihood is, particularly of a new family get into this, very scary. Yeah, I have a problem, but I'm not going to tell anybody, and I'm just going to sit on this, or I'm going to stew on it for 2 or 3 days. If there's a grace period where, you know what, I do have a problem, if the interviewer basically as part of that process instructs them, listen, you may not agree with what comes out of this and what we're coming up with as part of this assessment. Should you have a problem with this, this is the number to call. Here it is right at the bottom of the form. This is how you do it. And basically give them the means to be able to at least wait, ask the question or put something out there that says, wait a minute, I do have a concern, and there's a means for me to be able to do that. I think that provides that transparency, and it gives the families the outlet to be able to address the problem.
I think, as I said, I think the conversation is so helpful for people. I think we heard across the state about communication. One of the things that we heard from a lot of people, boy, it was really nice to get somewhere that anybody in the state could get the discussion of the type of systems and what you're going to do with it, right? That was consistent that everybody saw it. Some MCOs might do a great job, others may not. Yeah. But there's one place I can go. I don't have to worry about finding my MCO, but I can find it on some website and know that. Yeah. There's a consistent process about how to close the loop on it. I think those are great suggestions. And I hate to say it because John had one of them.
Not to speak for all the NCOs, but because we mail our SIS out, we did that purposefully to give people an opportunity to review it, rather than me coming right in and saying, "Oh, let me tell you about it." So people have some time to sit with it, and they're in that cover letter that accompanies the SIS assessment. There is contact information for myself. If people are, they have someone else they can contact if they have a question or some kind of concern like what you described.
Okay. Everybody good with just taking a quick 10-minute